So we have a new Jethro Tull album, more musings and flute wheezings from Mr. Anderson and co. But is it any good? Let's find out, shall we? After two consecutive Tull album releases, 2022 and 2023, we now have this one, Curious Ruminant. This will be available to purchase on the 7th of March in a number of formats, I suspect. I will put a purchasing link just below this video. This album, like Tull albums of late, are defined by that intricate weave of instrumentation, brilliant observations, all delivered with Anderson's now more conversational style of singing. Parts of this album are profoundly moving as he tackles some pretty weighty themes, all embellished with that obligatory Tull-esque strum and flutings. There is a luxurious wash of sound from the rich Hammond from the impressively bearded John O'Hara, and some most lovely solos from the fresh-faced guitarist Jack Clark, who really makes his mark on this album. We also have David Goodyear on bass and James Duncan on drums, and former keyboardist Andrew Giddings puts in an appearance, the ghost of Jethro Tull past, if you will. Not Martin Barr, though, who I suspect is actually no longer on Ian's Christmas card list. The idea behind this album seems to be a series of serious mullings on serious issues. Issues like world politics, death, the Middle East, human nature and betrayal. It seems to me that Anderson has been pounding the pavement at 3 a.m, chewing his own beard off over this stuff. This album is certainly for those who like to ponder deep stuff deeply, usually in the snug over a half a brown ale and a packet of pork scratchings. Anderson's writing here is often on a more personal level in terms of its lyric content, and this has been apparent with the last 3 albums. There seems to be an emphasis on looking inwards, on introspection, rather than the panoramic vistas of albums generally in this genre. This album is replete with Anderson's observational descriptions and heart-on-sleeve soul-searching probings that Ian is famed for of late. A collection of songs that represent a thoughtful introspection rather than a singular concept, with a wealth of new material and the use of some offcuts here and there. Some of the songs in this are excavated from unfinished musical demos made some years ago, which is perhaps why Andy Giddings rattles his chains from the margins of this one like Banquo's Ghost. What an appropriate literary allusion. Although these offcuts, if you will, are integrated seamlessly and do not result in a huge stylistic shift that has you spilling your cocoa. Instrumentally, it bears all the hallmarks of a Tull offering. Apart from the signature flute solos and melodies, we get accordion, mandolin, acoustic and tenor guitars, all serving to remind us of the Tull musical heritage from the 1970s. So let's look at this album track by track. Puppet and Puppet Masters, some great instrumental work on here. There's a wonderful guitar solo and some lovely Hammond work as well. Ian Anderson describes this as a song about manipulation. So who is pulling the strings? This idea is not new, of course, from Dylan identifying that we all serve somebody to ABBA singing I'm a Marionette in 1978. I'm a marionette, just a marionette on the string. But Anderson explores here the interesting dynamic between performer and audience, and perhaps ponders on who is really pulling the strings. The performer on stage may be controlling the audience, but while they are also, in another way, controlling the performer.
They got strings, but you can see there are no strings on me.
The pleasant tug of the puppeteer and the lure of the crowd continue to have a lure. Therefore, maybe the performer is controlled as well as manipulating the audience. It presents an interesting point for all the cogitators out there, a kind of a new twist on a well-thoroughed idea.
Anybody who has to take to a public stage is in that position where, in a way, they want to exercise some power and control of the people listening and watching. But at the same time, they are aware that what they do is also kind of being controlled by the expectations or the wishes of an audience.
Curious Ruminant, the title track, of course, is termed a song of cogitation. One who wallows too much, I suspect, in the vistas of their own mind, picking away at that Gordian knot of political intrigue and theological conundrums. Anderson states, "Ruminant can mean a contemplative, meditative person, or the more common reference, an even-toed ungulate who chews the regurgitated cud and has a 3 or 4 chambered stomach." I presume Anderson identifies with the former rather than the latter. As he mulls on contemplation, and musically it's appropriately thoughtful. It starts with some mournful flute lines and then accompanied by this chugging guitar, which has a real sort of 70s Tull feel to it. I think guitarist Jack Clark has a beautiful tone and tasteful presence in these songs. Dunnesnane Hill has a specifically Celtic feel. I mean, how appropriate for the appropriation of Macbeth for a song that deals specifically about ambition, somewhat unthwarted ambition as well.
I have no spur to prick the side of my intent, but only vaulting ambition.
It's a beautiful weave of instrumentation, complementing the husky rasp of Anderson's vocals. Macbeth, of course, is a meditation on betrayal and unchecked ambition. And the title is an obvious reference to Shakespeare's play and the coming of Birnam Wood. To Dunnesnane, which obviously fascinated Ian, a scene itself which marks Macbeth's betrayal, or at least the misleading of the protagonist by the 3 weird sisters.
Macbeth shall never vanquished be until great Birnam Wood, to high Dunsinane Hill, shall come against him.
That will never be.
Interestingly, the very emblem of the Anderson clan is an oak tree, with the motto, "Stand Sure." The Macbeth tale is imagined here as deeds of high intrigue and betrayal between 2 political party brothers, perhaps Blair and Brown, Sunak Johnson, maybe even Clegg and Cameron. Oh my God, do you remember those? There's certainly been a lot of political intrigue in British politics over the last few years, providing a rich source of material for such consideration on the very nature of betrayal. Apparently the song was developed from an unrecorded instrumental played live a few times back in 2007. The Tipu House is a lively number, which even makes Anderson's voice sound rather sprightly. This is the best number on the album in my opinion. Described as a song of aspiration in adversity, the chorus line mentions the Day of Books and Roses, which is a reference to St. George's Day, the April festival in Barcelona, which tends to celebrate the tradition of lovers giving books and roses to each other. Ian sings of those that have risen from relative poverty to positions of greatness in the world. And there is a delightful lyric video showing the tumble of life, with women of all ages waiting upon useless men, as Anderson calls them. Lots of rich colours presented in the animation. As I said, it refers the Day of Books and Roses, in which the romance of it is juxtaposed with drudgery and disappointment of everyday life. Savannah of Paddington Green, which opens with a jungle-like chuckle of birds, reminiscent of Anderson's solo album, perhaps, before the gorgeous acoustic strummings of Anderson's guitar with accordion accompaniment. I love the double tracking on Anderson's voice in this one. Paddington Green is one of historic London's formerly outlying small green spaces. This is not the first time, of course, Ian has spoken of the conflict between the natural world and the encroaching sprawl.
Which is one of those sort of folk myth things. It's all about a chappie called Jack in the Green, he keeps Britain's green and verdant pastures alive in the cold winter months to be reborn anew in spring.
Stygian Hand is a sprightly number with bright flute lines that very much announce themselves at the beginning. Here we're dealing with a number that concerns itself with a moment of fear and vulnerability when out at night. A fear that's real or possibly imagined, and a footfall or figure perceived from the corner of one's eye emerging from the shadows. And Stygian relates to the river Styx, and crossing over into death, which adds to the dark and ghostly atmosphere of this one. It can also mean something shady, like a Stygian hand placed upon your shoulder when you least expect it. Over Jerusalem, it's pretty obvious what the concern of this number is. The Arabs and the Jews boys is too much for me. And Ian's response to the problem is to try to make a little difference with his music, I think, or playing there as he's done a few times over the years, hoping to bring about a little harmony and common resolve. Love the beginning of this with the acoustic strum accompanied by the flute. And if it wasn't for Anderson's aged voice, you'd think this was something lifted from the Minstrel in the Gallery album. As he sings along to some delightful picking, "There's no time for meditation," he sings, ironic on an album whose very title seems to suggest a preoccupation with just that. Drink from the Same Well is an epic piece on this album that was developed from unfinished sort of musical jammings and demos. Of course, this features Andrew Giddings, of course, who obviously gets a credit on this one. Many years later, Anderson wanted to develop this, add lyrics and a new melody to provide listeners with a stellar virtuoso performance on both his concert and bamboo flutes. Interim Sleep is a song that taps into that rich poetic tradition of comforting the bereaved, with lines that negate the finality of death. Philip Larkin said religion is nothing more than a vast moth-eating musical brigade created to pretend we never die. He was a cheerful bugger. But this sense of pessimistic finality is something that Ian Anderson rejects.
But the idea of total finality and the rather cynical belief that religion is just an excuse to try and, stop you wetting the bed at the last minute, then, I'm afraid I don't have a lot of sympathy with any idea like that, because it's life and death are much more complicated.
I think this was a song that was written a few years ago that Anderson wanted to develop. And it certainly touches upon the weighty theme of life and afterlife. Musically, this album is delightful. It's a wonderful weave of flute and acoustic instrumentation with some nice heavy guitar parts, and Hammond, of course. I love the sound of the Hammond organ. It always broadens the musical palette of a record, I think. Lyrically and thematically, it's profound and well observed, but a mere collection of songs than labouring under the weight of any kind of conceptual arc. These later Tull issues, Anderson's much eroded voice is very much reduced to a kind of tuneful speaking, making the whole thing feel like I'm listening to a poetry recitation to music. It's very much in keeping with a Tull album these days. I find it enjoyable, pleasant album, but it's been many years since I've been blown away by a Tull release. But then I suspect Anderson isn't particularly interested in that. More appealing to those of us who enjoy his observations and ruminations on life and human nature. Anyway, we've been listening to a review of the brand new Jethro Tull album, Curious Ruminant, which will be out on the 7th of March. As I said at the beginning, there is a purchasing link just below this video, and you can buy it in a number of formats. I'll leave you with my closing catchphrase, which is, as you know by now, hope you're well, staying safe, and of course that you keep listening.